What's going on, guys? We are back for another online versus commentary, and today I want to talk a little bit about the NHL and the NBA. So, for those of you guys that were paying attention to the Four Nations face off, you obviously know that the tournament did really well and it got a lot of eyeballs on the sport, got a lot of people interested in the hockey being played, and it was probably the most relevant. So I'm going to actually play as the Rangers here. And the reason I'm picking the Rangers is because the last time the NHL was this relevant against the NBA directly would have been 1994 when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but back to the Four Nations before I get too far off track. The Four Nations drew a lot of eyeballs. People were very invested in what was going on between the US and Canada. There was obviously a whole bunch going on with that, both on the ice and off the ice. And it begs the question as to whether or not, like, is the NHL really pushing the NBA here, right? And there's a couple of ways that you can look at it. There's been a whole bunch of commentary on what's going on, and of course, this is the second commentary video I do that the team I'm playing against is the team that I'm playing as. That's hilarious. But you've seen a whole bunch of commentary as to what the NBA is messing up, what the NHL is doing right. Now, I'll start with this. When it comes to the NBA, so I am a very casual fan of the NBA. I have not watched basketball in a good while. I play more NBA 2K than I watch actual basketball. So I can't really comment on the product that the NBA is putting out, you know, as well as I can with the NHL. But I'll say this: there was a time that I was genuinely interested in what was going on in the NBA, and that was probably like the mid 2010s. Warriors doing good again. Things are the league to me was still pretty interesting as a casual fan, but I feel like over time you've kind of I think people have just gotten kind of bored of their product, and it's just you're constantly shoving down superstars and how great the superstars are all the time. And this is something that the NHL needs to be very careful with, because when it comes to basketball, it's all about LeBron, it's all about Curry, it's all about Giannis, I guess, KD, obviously. It's really it's a handful of superstars, and then there's really nothing. Like, unless you're a basketball diehard, you don't know anything else that's going on. You don't know the other players. And it's also the nature of basketball. Like, basketball, you don't really need to rely on your depth guys as much as the NHL, right? There's really no fourth line. Like, sometimes you get good scoring off the bench in the NBA, but very rarely is that the big story or what draws people to the game. And hockey, it's those fourth line guys that make like the best stories and everything. But if you notice, what happened with the Four Nations was what really drew people in was the fights between the US and Canada, and it was the Kachucks, and those are two superstars, and then JT Miller and Pareko. But again, I mean, it kind of, those aren't really super well-known guys. At least the Kachucks are, but nobody knows who Colton Pareko is. Not many people know who JT Miller is, right? Unless you're a diehard hockey fan, you don't know who JT Miller is. And the guys that fought for Canada, Hagel and Bennett, these aren't household names, right? So that all of that drew eyeballs to that game and made headlines was four of those six players that fought were arguably not. I'm not saying they're all stars because they're playing on the two best hockey countries in the world, and they're playing in that tournament, so they're obviously stars, but they're not like mega stars. They're not guys they're not LeBron equivalent or Curry equivalent in terms of basketball, right? So it makes you wonder, like, where does the NHL go from here? Right? Where does the NHL take it? Because this was a huge opportunity. They knocked it out of the park. They did great. But now it's like, okay, you got all this attention. What do you do with it? And it's kind of made me, I hesitated a little bit about after the tournament because everybody's talking about, oh my god, the NHL passed, the NBA, like the NBA All Star Game was terrible, it didn't get good ratings, the NHL got such good ratings, and then I would counter and say, well, was it the NHL or was it international best on best hockey, right? And that's a big difference, right? That's a big difference because the NHL was working with a very unique set of circumstances, and obviously you know, the situation between the U.S. and Canada added fuel to the fire, and it created a perfect opportunity for those hockey games to be played and for people to want to watch those hockey games. Is that going to carry over into future games? I don't know. The Stanley Cup final did pretty good last year. It was obviously a crazy final. Edmonton almost comes back and it's great, great stories there, everything. And it did pretty good, but moving forward, it's like what does the NHL do? Because you have such a good product and it's just felt like over the years the NHL just doesn't know what to do with it. And I was watching something PK Subban went on. I think I don't know if it was ESPN. I don't know what show he went on, but he basically was talking. They asked him, why, like, what happened basically with the four nations? Why is it doing better? What's wrong with the NBA and everything? And he just basically said, like, the players in hockey care more and they're more invested, and they don't, they play injured. He played injured, and there's just more. And it's true. Like, even if you're the biggest basketball fan, you know that the culture around basketball is way different than the culture around hockey is. Guys in the NBA, they make so much money. They're superstars. They don't care, and they don't even care in the games that matter. So getting them to care for an All-Star game, like, yeah, that's never gonna like. It's just not with this generation. I don't think you're changing. I don't think the culture for basketball is ever changing. It is what it is. Like, we're never going back to a basketball where you have the 90s where you have these legendary battles between the Bulls and the Pistons and all those, and how hard they competed. Like, you're never going to get to that point again with basketball. At least I don't think. I don't see it going back to that just because of the generation of just not even athletes at this point, just the generation of people, the way people are today. These guys are getting paid so much money. You're gonna find it few and far between those guys that just truly care about the game and the purity of the game and just the competition side of it. It's not good. And there will always be competitors in sport, like true competitors in sport that are the Sidney Crosby equivalent in basketball. Like, you always find those guys. There will be those guys in basketball, but they are not as prevalent as they are in hockey. And that's kind of what Subban was saying in this interview. And I agree with him. I don't think that'll ever change with basketball. I don't think that's happening, right, anytime soon. So All-Star Game, forget it. The All-Star Game's never going to change. Now, when it comes to actual product against actual, like, regular NBA season games versus regular NHL season games, and then playoffs as well. The playoffs are absolutely the NHL's best. Like, that's the best way that you could sell the game, because if you want to see anything remotely close to what you saw with the Four Nations face-off, watch the playoffs. Watch any game in the playoffs. First round, second round, third round, final, doesn't matter. The product is the intensity that you saw in the Four Nations face-off. You will see that throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs. You don't see that in basketball. I mean, you get a first round, teams are getting swept, teams are just getting cooked. Like, it's just not even close. And that, I think, has hurt the product, because if you kind of know, like, if you see, okay, these teams are completely mismatched, this team's just going to absolutely walk through the other team, then yeah, people aren't going to really be that interested in watching unless you're a fan of the team that's going to win. Who cares, right? And there still are competitive series. Like, eventually you do get some evenly matched teams. It happens. But most of the time, you kind of know who's going to win, right? And that, I think, has hurt the NBA over the years, is that there's no really... And the NHL always said there's parity, and there is parity in the NHL. There is, and that makes it more interesting. Like, when you just don't know how it's going to go. And I think that played into the Four Nations face-off very well. And that you have two really good, evenly matched teams that you don't, whereas, in the past it's like you always knew, Canada's just going to win and that's it. And now it's like the US is right there. It's interesting, it's competitive, and the other games were great too. Finland and Sweden were competitive, it was close. That is some of the NHL's best, attributes in selling the game of hockey, is that it's ultra competitive at basically any given game, always. And as the further you go in the season, once you get to the to the actual playoffs, it's insane. The level of play is insane. The fighting, I still think the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs is the most exciting time in sports. Like, I always get jacked up every year, and I've been watching hockey and playing hockey for 20 years, and I get like a kid when it comes to the first round of the playoffs. It's just, everybody thinks they can win. It's exciting. The narrative's going into it. The level of play, the physicality, the fighting, the goals, the talent, everything. It's just, there's nothing like it. And I wish that the NHL would find a way to propel those games to a regular audience the way that the Four Nations just drew people in. Yeah, I would argue that the first round of the playoffs is more exciting. Like, I get it. That Four Nations had a lot on the line. I understand. The talent was crazy. I get it. But in terms of like the actual hockey being played in the Four Nations games, especially between the US and Canada, the hockey was not as good as you would want it to be. Like, it was as high level as it gets. But sometimes when you have like that high level on both sides throughout the lineup, it makes for a pretty I'm not saying boring, but relatively boring, because it's just everybody is so good that there's no room on the ice. I mean, and a lot of the superstars got contained. Austin Matthews leaves that tournament, he has no goals. McDavid had a pretty bad tournament. He scores the game winner, but he was contained in the US games. I get it, he scores in both games, but other than those goals, he wasn't generating anywhere near as much as he does in NHL games. And that was just because of the level of play that you had on both sides. Whereas when you get into regular season NHL and playoff NHL hockey, you have very talented teams, but they're not US and Canada talent, right? I mean, it's different because you have true fourth liners, you got third liners, it's completely different. But that makes for more entertaining hockey because there's more mistakes. You get mismatches. You get a first line out there against a fourth line. You get some offense. You get fight, everything. Like, you get the whole mix. So I would say that in terms of the actual, like, just the games themselves, yeah, I'm taking the first round of the play. That might be a penalty shot. Or no, we're good. Just a penalty. Okay. It's a good game here. Rangers against Rangers. Love it. But the actual product, yeah, I'm taking the first round of the playoffs, right? I'm taking the first, and it's fantastic. And I hope that the NHL leans into that more, because really now the question is, like, how do you move forward from that tournament, right? Like, what do you do now? Where do you go? How do you continue to grow the game? Because that tournament was great, but it's over now, right? And now, and Canada won, which, does it kill everything? No, but it would have been a lot better for hockey in the States if the US won. They didn't win the game. So now, you gotta work with, Canada won the game. And that tournament was so fast, and it passes by, and now we go, and it's basically, like, what does the NHL do from here? That I'm very curious to see, like, kind of how they maximize this moment. How do they build on this moment? I loved what Subban was saying just about, how players are, the culture around hockey, how competitive these guys are. Yeah, you got to lean into that. There has to be a way you can market this, and the NHL does not need to go this superstar. Like, yes, there are superstars in the league, but play into the fact that when hockey is at its purest form and when it's at its most competitive, there is nothing in the world that is better to watch. And if the Four Nations proved anything, against the NBA All-Star game is that yeah, like that it can get even better. It can get even better. And when you're playing, when you're watching these games at this level, it's just there's nothing like it. There's nothing more competitive. There's nothing more compelling. There's nothing more intense. It's any sport, hockey at its most competitive is. I'm biased, all right. I'm biased. I'm a hockey guy through and through, but I've watched other sports. I've watched basketball. I've watched plenty of Super Bowls, which is, the big event for football. I've watched MLB games. I've watched other sport. I've watched soccer. I MMA. I would say MMA is pretty can get pretty intense too. But I sincerely think that hockey, when it's at its most competitive, is the best watch. It really is. It's just, getting that message across to people has been just it's been the hardest thing for the league to do. And I don't know if they were ready for how good this Four Nations face off was going to do. I don't think they were. There were a lot of people doubting this tournament. There were a lot of people that were unsure about the tournament. They didn't think it was going to be good. They thought it was going to be boring. They didn't think the players were going to compete. But then you see, like, the second that you get these players to care and to want to compete, you don't have to do much. And that's the beautiful thing about hockey. It's like, give the players something to play for. Oh, they're going to play for it. And I guess the question is now, it's like, okay, going forward, because, the playoffs are 1 point of the year, but you still have a regular season. Can you get people more interested in a regular season? I think so. It'll never be as interesting as the playoffs, but I talked about this a little bit, I think, in one of my other videos, and that the NHL, if this tournament proves anything, is that rivalry and genuine dislike for your opponent is another huge part of getting people jacked up to watch games, right? I mean, that was Canada against the US. Like that, it was a huge moment in time. It was intense. It was, the rivalry was there. People were buying into it. And you had two fan bases, two countries that they really wanted their team to win that freaking game. And you can do that in the NHL. Can you do it at that level? No. But you can get two teams to really just dislike each other. And I don't know about you guys, but as someone who's been watching hockey for a good while now, it feels like rivalries have kind of simmered down in the NHL. And you get Toronto Boston every year. Toronto Boston has been great. They keep meeting in the playoffs, and they've been at it for a while now, and that's probably the best rivalry we have in hockey today. But if you look past that, it's like, what rivalry matchups have we had in the NHL in recent years that have produced like those type, like, you got Florida Boston, they didn't like each other, but it's like nothing, it's not as memorable as Boston Montreal of the old days, and Detroit and Colorado, like, putting Detroit in the Eastern Conference and separating them from Colorado when they have all this history. Like, where are the new and I'm a Ranger fan. I don't even feel the same rivalry with the Islanders anymore. And I don't know if it's because how they, I remember when I first started watching hockey, which would have been in 2005, 2006, the amount of times that, like, we would play against the Islanders, it felt like it was like every week. It was like 8-9 times a year. It was insane. Like they put them up against each other a lot, and now they kind of changed. I don't know how many games you play against the Islanders in 1 year, or any given team in your division, but I don't think it's anywhere near that much, because there's more teams in the league now. And it's just kind of, I don't know, like, the meaning of those rivalries has died out. I don't know what, there has to be something you can do to make the rivalries mean something again, right? I mean, it feels like that part of the game has been lacking for a while. And I don't know how you fix it, but I don't know if you do more division games. It's tricky, right? Because all the teams want like all the other teams coming to their arena at least one time, right? One time a year, and it makes things tricky. So schedule kind of tightens up. There isn't as much opportunity. I think more home and homes would be great. I don't know why. Like I would schedule more. Like let's do mini series during the year. Let's have the Rangers and Islanders play. I mean, I wouldn't even be against having rivalry like a week. Do a week play. Have the Rangers and if you're gonna make these guys play 3-4 games a week, have the Rangers and Islanders play each other 3 times in a week. And you don't think by that third game those teams aren't gonna absolutely hate each other? Of course they are. But if they're only meeting each other, okay, once in October, then we're not gonna see them again until freaking I don't know February or whatever. It's like the way the schedule is. It's like it's kind of made those rivalry games into basically just another game on the calendar, and I don't think that's a good thing for the product. I think that kind of makes each regular season game feel exactly the same. And basically like the only time that now you'll see a regular season game get that intense is if there was an incident between the two teams earlier in the season. So when like earlier this year when McDavid gets suspended against Vancouver and then they play each other again a few days later, coincidentally because of the scheduling, that game became a lot bigger even though McDavid wasn't playing in it, but you just knew that this is going to be an intense game because of what just happened, right? And you could create more of those situations without suspensions if you just have these teams play each other a couple of times in a week. Why not? Why not? I would totally, I think that would be great. I think that would help with the product for the NHL. That would make the games feel more meaningful, be more meaningful. And that, I think that's how you get back to that because now it's like, chasing that Four Nations high and in a regular season NHL like it's damn near impossible. But I really do think the biggest lesson that we learned there is competition is at its best is just it's what people want to see, and rivalries. That's really what sells the game of hockey. That will always be hockey's greatest strength, and that's what the NHL needs to lean into. Get these players to get mad at each other. Get them playing each other a bunch. It's just and the rest and the game speaks for itself. And then you get a USA Canada game, and it doesn't need to be a best on best country against country tournament. It could just be San Jose and Los Angeles. It can be the Islanders against the Rangers. It can be Tampa against Florida. It can be Philadelphia against Pittsburgh. I mean, you have these built-in freaking rivalries all over the place. Like, just lean into them. I don't. I wish the NHL would do that more. I hope they do. I hope they understand. I hope they learn their lessons with this tournament, because if they do, then you got something to run with. And when it comes to the NBA, I mean, what does the NBA have left after this? After this All-Star weekend, and kind of they weaken a little bit in terms of their kind of their relevance. They're asking questions. There's media talk. I mean, they were talking about NBA ratings being bad all year leading up to this, and then the All-Star game's just kind of the cherry on top. And now you're at this point where it's just getting worse and worse. They're probably going to have a really rough playoff. There's probably not going to be a lot of people that watch the playoffs, and that's where, the NHL can gain some ground. It's going to take some time because the NBA has a lot of celebrity pull right now. Getting back to 1994 and when hockey was more relevant than the NBA, it's not going to be easy because the NBA has gained a lot of ground on the NHL. And it's going to take the NHL some time. It's going to take a lot more than one tournament for the NHL to become more relevant than the NBA. It's going to take a bunch of effort. It's not going to be easy, that's for sure. It's definitely not going to be easy. But it's possible. You have to lean into your strengths as a sport, I think. I don't think you should go the superstar route, because once you go the superstar route, you kind of you step away from what makes hockey so entertaining and how anybody can be a hero and how every player on the team matters and when it becomes more personality based than sport based, that's when people just get fed up with it. Because how much are you gonna get people interested in what LeBron had for breakfast? It's like it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what they've been doing in terms of their marketing. I think has just gotten exhausting for true fans of basketball, and it's become more tabloid and just what is this person doing instead of what's going on the court, right? And it's just completely personality instead of what are these teams doing on the court, on the ice, what's going on in the actual game, and not outside of that, right? And as long as the NHL stays away from that and they lean into their strengths, yeah, I think over time people will come over because it wasn't that long ago that the NHL was more relevant. There was a time, and I believe it was I think it was a Sports Illustrated um, cover, and I think it had the Rangers on it, and it I don't remember exactly what it said, but basically something about the NHL being better than the NBA at the time, and it was right after the Rangers won the cup in '94. And that's crazy because that's right in the middle of the Bulls and Jordan and everything. At the peak of their powers, the NHL was actually doing really good. Granted, the Rangers were doing great, and I think the league does better when the Rangers are doing better and Toronto's doing better. I think it's easier to to push those teams. They're huge markets, but uh, it can still work without those teams because it's about what's happening on the ice in the games that matters. That's the NHL's strength. That's hockey's strength against basketball. And as long as the NHL realizes that and keeps pushing that and keeps finding ways to make games more meaningful, because like we saw, once you make the game more meaningful, that's when you get the best hockey possible. So as long as they can find a way to do that, I think the route is through rivalry. Maybe they can come up with something else. Yeah, I think the NBA is gonna keep faltering because I don't see the NBA changing anything anytime soon that makes the game more intense. I don't see it. So this trend, yeah, it continued because I heard they had like Mr. Beast at the freaking All Star game giving money away, and it's like, dude, are you freaking kidding me? Like, I mean, look, good, whatever, you know, power to him, but no, Mr. Beast. If you're resorting to Mr. Beast as as relevance at the All Star game, it's like what's going on here, guys? Like, do we like? I don't know. It's just something's telling me that there's a disconnect between true fans of basketball and who's in charge of the NBA. And if they keep heading in that direction, which I think they will, because I think the NBA is just going to keep being stubborn, I don't see them changing. If they just keep going in that direction, yeah, you're going to keep seeing fans leave and look for something else. And you might have people that, used to be all about basketball. They're like, you know what? Let me go watch some hockey. I heard about the Kachucks. I heard about the fighting. I want to go see something more intense. And people love that too. People love the fighting. I think they got to lean into that too. I don't think that I know there's a lot of pushback against fighting and hockey and injury and everything. Listen, guys, hockey's a physical sport. People are going to get hurt whether or not you fight. Does fighting increase the odds of more serious injury? Yes, but these players know what they're signing up for, and it sucks. But it's a physical violent sport. It's just that's the way it is. And that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it always will be. I'm not saying you got to go back to 1970s full on barbaric wars on the ice, but yeah, and fighting is part of it. Two guys that want to throw down, that's always been one of hockey's best drawing points too. That's what got a lot of eyeballs in the Four Nations too. Those Kachuk fights and Miller's fight. Lean into that. Lean into the fighting. There's nothing, you don't have to say that it's just fighting that sells the game. It can be all the other great stuff that makes us love hockey too. But fighting's part of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. And own it. Own it. You're the only sport that's like, hey, you can fight in our game. It's okay. You only go to the box for 5 minutes and then you're good to go. So that's kind of my thoughts on the NHL versus the NBA and where I think things are and where I think things will end up. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on a matter. What do you think? Is the NHL going to pass the NBA? Is the NBA going to regain its ground? Was this just a one and done? Love to hear what you guys think about it, all that. Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It goes a long way. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.